The Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, chapter 9, verses 30 to 37. Jesus and his disciples left that area and began a journey through Galilee. But he did not wish anyone to know about it. He was teaching his disciples and telling them, "The Son of Man is to be handed over to men, and they will kill him. And 3 days after his death, he will rise." But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to question him. They came to Capernaum, and once inside the house, Jesus began to ask them, "What were you arguing about on the way?" Apparently, Jesus was walking ahead of them, and they were arguing about something. And so when they got to the house, Jesus says, "Well, what were you arguing about on the way?" But they remained silent, it says here in the Gospel. They were ashamed. They had been discussing among themselves on the way who was the greatest. Then Jesus sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "If anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all, and the servant of all." Taking a child, he placed it in their midst, and putting his arms around the child, he said to them, "Whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me but the one who sent me." It might be good to get the background of this gospel before we think about it. Jesus calls his disciples, right? "Follow me, come follow me." And in the early days, he worked many miracles, and the words that flowed from his mouth, they just seemed to be a great consolation to people, words of life. And he spoke with authority. And so many people, not just the 12 disciples, but many people gathered about him. So that was 1 year passed, and maybe the second, and it was now maybe getting into the 3rd year and closer to where Jesus was going to suffer and die. And that's the first time he tells them about what's going to happen to him, that they're going to crucify him and kill him, and that he will rise. And as we just read in the Gospel, they did not understand what he was trying to say that. What was he meaning? In fact, they interpret it literally, and Peter was the first one, I guess, to respond and say, "Lord, not that, anything but that." And the other disciples, too, felt the same way. Why the cross? Up until now, we've been riding high, you might say. People following us, people glad that you're working miracles, and they appreciate your words of life. But now is the time. And Jesus says, "This is why I came." So they did not understand, and it just kind of went over their head. And the first time, Jesus, and as I say, St. Peter, he tried to rebuke Jesus about this and say, no, Jesus, not this. But on the contrary, Jesus rebuked him and says, "Get behind me, Satan." And the other disciples too. And then he spoke the second time, and this too, it didn't get through to them. a couple of them came to him and said, "We'd like to sit your right hand and left hand when you get into your kingdom." And now it's the third time that Jesus was speaking to them about it, and they didn't get the meaning, didn't understand it, and were afraid to question Jesus. And so they remained silent. And that's when Jesus sat down, and then he really told them the important thing. He took a little child and placed it in their midst, and put his arms around that child, and he said to them, "Whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but the one who sent me." So Jesus is telling us something very, very basic. We need humility, we need reliance and faith and trust in Almighty God, like a little child, depending on its parent. There are many of the saints who appreciated these words, but I would just like to quote from Saint Therese of the child Jesus, or the infant Jesus. And I'm going to read this because it struck me as something very beautiful, and I would like to share it with you. So I will read it. Saint Therese found a passage from the book of Proverbs, the Old Testament, that struck her with particular force. "Whosoever is a little one, let him come to me." That's from the book of Proverbs. And from the book of Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, she was profoundly struck by another passage. "You shall be carried at the breasts, and upon the knees they shall caress you. As one whom the mother caresses, so will I comfort you." Well, Saint Therese read that, and she concluded that Jesus would carry her to the summit of holiness, of sanctity. The smallness of Therese, of Saint Therese, her limits, became in this way grounds for joy, not for discouragement. She wasn't discouraged because she was weak, but it was the basis of her joy because she was able to open her heart and to trust Jesus. And then she writes, and this is her own writing now, "I will seek out a means of getting to heaven by a little way, very short and very straight, a little way that is wholly new." We live in an age of inventions. Nowadays, the people don't need to climb stairs. They have escalators and elevators instead. Well, I mean to try and find an elevator by which I may be raised unto God, for I am too tiny to climb the steep stairway of perfection. Thine arms, then, O Jesus, are the elevator, which must raise me up unto heaven. To get there, I need not grow. On the contrary, I must remain little. I must become less and less. Well, those are her words, meaningful for all of us to live as a little child, a spiritual child. Lord, make me humble. Make me a spiritual child, trusting in you, relying on you, and not on my own efforts, in order to get to my heavenly goal. God bless you, and may the Lord keep you in His love and in His light.